Hello everyone, my name is Kador, and today I'm going to be talking about legendary Japanese noise band Hijokaidan. Specifically, I will be reviewing their 30-year retrospective box set compilation, appropriately titled The Noise. I recently decided to tackle this behemoth and make it a structured listening challenge for myself by listening to one disc every day for the entirety of the month of August. Since there are 31 days in that month and only 30 discs in this compilation, I was allowed one skip day, but otherwise I successfully subjected myself to around an hour a day of some of the most intense and uncompromising harsh noise you can hear. While this did get somewhat exhausting and tedious after a couple weeks, I feel very satisfied to have gotten through this thing, because I truly feel that it is a monumentally important work within the noise world that every true noise fan needs to hear at least once. And there are also some fun and unexpected deviations from their typical noise style towards the end of the box that felt like a small reward after the hours of sonic torture I endured leading up to it. But enough about me, let's talk about this wonderful band. Hijokaidan was formed in 1979, making them one of the earliest known noise bands. The original lineup consisted of Jojo Hiroshige and Naoki Zushi, with Zushi leaving by the end of the year and the project being put on temporary hiatus. The next year, Jojo formed a band called Corroded Mary, which featured Toshiji Mikawa and several other members. And they originally wanted to play spacey psych rock like Hawkwind, but their recording sessions ended up sounding more like just freely improvised noise. When they were booked on their first show, they were mistakenly billed under the name Hijokaidan, so they decided to just abandon the Corroded Mary alias and stick with Hijokaidan. From here on, the band had a steadily rotating and shifting cast of members, with the consistent core group being Jojo, Mikawa, Okano Futoshi, and Junko. This massive compilation essentially consists of a bunch of live performance recordings of Hijokaidan and its members' various side projects presented in chronological order. So, with all the juxtaposition out of the way, let's get into each individual disc. And I should also mention that I wrote all my thoughts down on each disc each day as I listened to them, so I'll just kind of be reading out my thoughts in sort of like a diary entry type form throughout this video on each individual disc. Starting with Disc 1. This first disc dates all the way back to 1979 and features material from the original Hijokaidan two-person lineup. Pretty damn impressive that they were playing stuff like this back in the 70s. The 10-2 show is great, basically just guitar noise with some screaming, but done just about as well as you can do that kind of noise. And the 11-16 show is a bit more on the free improv side of things and less harsh noise, and it fares a bit worse than the first show due to the less intense and more noodly playing, but it's still pretty cool and interesting to listen to. 7 out of 10. Disc 2. The first 4 discs of this comp consist of the original lineup and are all recorded between 1979 and 1980. Disc 2 here is mostly just aimless guitar noise wankery without much bass or interesting sounds in general, and the recording is rather thin. Some moments get surprisingly sparse and relatively quiet, and overall it's a noteworthy departure from their usual harsh maelstrom, but not very skillfully executed or satisfying to listen to. 6 out of 10. Disc 3. This disc is just one continuous track, and it's a very good one. They add in a lot of more fun electronic sounds to complement the guitar this time, making for a more chaotic and engaging experience. 8 out of 10. Disc 4. This disc is especially noteworthy as it marks the addition of drums, saxophone, and piano into the Hijokaidan sound. This naturally opens up a whole new realm of sonic possibilities, and for the most part, they are utilized very well here. Some of these tracks are basically free jazz, while others lean more on the noise side of things. The drums often cohere into an actual repetitive rhythm, making these tracks seem a bit more musical than their usual affair. And this disc has a lot of variety and dynamics to it, making it my favorite in this box so far. 8 out of 10. Disc 5. This is one of the few discs in this box that was actually previously released as its own album, called Zoruko no Kiboyo in 1982. It opens with a very short track featuring nothing but the sounds of someone gagging and or vomiting, followed by a small crowd applauding, which is simultaneously disgusting, hilarious, and a perfect intro to the disc. It's followed by perhaps my favorite track I've heard from Hijokaidan so far, a drony, dizzying storm of atmospheric sounds and nutso sax playing, totally entrancing. And the rest of the album more or less follows suit stylistically, with some occasional noise core-ish, frantic blasting. The way they utilize dissonance here is really astounding. It just sucks you into this mind-melting, hellish soundscape. It's fun to see how much they've progressed in just 2 years. 8 out of 10. Disc 6. This disc skips forward a couple years to a single-track 84 performance. It's just a chaotic maelstrom of harsh sounds all the way through, with a pretty prominent drum rhythm going throughout most of it. Nothing particularly different or special, but a solid piece of noise for sure. 7 out of 10. Disc 7. This disc features a lot of high-pitched feedback noodling, calling to mind early Prurient live shows. I'm sure Hijokaidan was a big inspiration for him. While it is impressively harsh for 85, I can't say it's all that enjoyable to listen to, and this disc in general lacks many interesting sounds and is downright obnoxious at times. Not terrible overall, but probably my least favorite disc so far. 5 out of 10. Disc 8. What a surprise, more noise. This disc is more or less what you'd expect from them at this point, without too many interesting surprises. I guess I haven't mentioned Junko's yelpy vocals yet, and they appear prominently on a few of the tracks here, but there's nothing much to say about them. They're a bit one-dimensional, but add a nice energy to the noise sometimes. Also, they do a little Gero Gege tribute on the last track, with the kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, followed by a bunch of noise blasting kind of thing, so that's funny. But overall, this disc is just some decent noise, but nothing remarkable. 6 out of 10. Disc 9. 3 different tracks from 3 different 85 live shows. The first one has a very thin recording and features primarily shrill feedback and screaming, a bit grating, and only takes advantage of a small sliver of the frequency spectrum, so I'm not very into this one. The second track is more interesting, with an electronic pulse and all sorts of strange noises throughout it. The recording is still very thin and washed out, but at least the sonic ideas are better here. And the last track is a half-hour long and is actually pretty excellent, going through multiple different phases and sounding progressively dynamic as a result. Lots of unnerving mechanical sounds in this one. It's very cool. Overall, this disc is a mixed bag, but it's worth it for track 3 at least. 7 out of 10. Disc 10. A couple of tracks from 86 here. The first one is a very dense wall of shifting noise that's pleasant enough to listen to and rather satisfying. The other track is similar, but a bit more atmospheric and psychedelic sounding, with some hellish vocal parts. And yeah, both tracks are great. 8 out of 10. Disc 11. The first track here is on the more spacey psych side of things, and its main characteristic is the ritualistic chant-type vocals with tons of delay and other effects thrown on. I appreciate the dizzying atmosphere created here, although I generally enjoy their noisier material more. And thankfully, the next track is just that, a harsh maelstrom of sonic destruction with some manic drums blasting away throughout the whole thing. The last track is also some chaotic, harsh noise, but the recording is rather thin and the textures aren't all that satisfying, so it's a bit less enjoyable, but still a very solid disc overall. 7 out of 10. Disc 12. Most of these tracks from 87 are a bit different from one another, so I'll just share my thoughts on each of them. The first is a very short one featuring frantic drumming and general noise chaos, not bad. The second has some of the most throat-shredding, intense screams I've heard from Hijokaidan so far, but they're infrequent, and the noise otherwise is kind of muffled and not very impactful. The third is just a lengthy, dense slab of solid noise, nothing more, nothing less. And the last track is similar, but with more of a focus on Junko's hellish screams. And I noticed a more heavy use of the flanger effect on this disc, which I suppose makes things sound a bit more psychedelic, but I also feel like that effect is rather one-dimensional and not very sonically interesting. The most impressive part of this disc is definitely the vocals. The noise itself is solid, but ultimately standard for them at this point. So, 7 out of 10. Disc 13. This disc contains just 2 tracks, and they're both as close to what we'd today label as harsh noise as anything in this box so far. The first track is great, just a satisfying, shifting mass of chaotic, distorted sounds. The second one features more of an emphasis on vocals, and fares a bit worse due to the thin and distant recording quality, but still pretty good for what it is. 8 out of 10 overall. Disc 14. Two tracks from '89 here. The first one is a bit one-dimensional, not quite as dense as I typically like their stuff to be, but I do appreciate its dizzying atmosphere. The other track is heavier and more mesmerizing in its unrelenting harshness, and while there's nothing else particular I can say about it, I really enjoyed this one. 7 out of 10. Disc 15. We've entered the 90s and made it to the halfway point of the box. Track 1 is a half hour of unrelenting harsh noise featuring Junko's exasperated moans. It's pretty much everything I'd want to hear in a Hijokaidan track, but I think I'm starting to get a bit tired of listening to so much of their stuff on such a regular basis, because I still found myself wanting more from it somehow. The other two tracks more or less follow suit in this sense, with the addition of drums on the last one. It's all decent quality noise, but I can't help but feel that it's getting a bit tiresome and redundant at this point, and that they aren't showing much growth or progression with their sound. Can't give up yet though, I'm only halfway through. 7 out of 10. Disc 16. The first track on this disc features a lot of weird Junko vocals interspersed with high-pitched feedback tones, such that it's difficult to tell which is which sometimes. This ambiguity is interesting in theory, but in practice it just sounds kind of obnoxious, and the noise otherwise is just alright. The most noteworthy thing about the other track here is the 30 seconds of almost black metal-esque riffing that pops up near the beginning, in addition to some generally dissonant and freaky sounding guitar playing throughout. But aside from that, it's more or less the type of noise you expect from them at this point. 6 out of 10. Disc 17. This disc is actually part of a previously released album of theirs called The Never-Ending Story of the King of Noise, released in 1992. It's some really great stuff that's more well-recorded than anything in this box so far, and as such is very dense and psychedelic, with lots of interesting different noises swimming around in a pool of chaos. Definitely one of the best discs so far, and I can see why they decided to include it here despite its previous release. 8 out of 10. Disc 18. This disc is also part of the Never-Ending Story of the King of Noise album, and is just about as great as the other one. The first track is a short exercise in high-pitched feedback tones, but unlike their previous attempts at using feedback, this track sounds genuinely painful and brutal and has a real intense energy to it, rather than just being grating and obnoxious. The rest of the disc is filled by the track Kept Waiting So Long live at Anti-Knock, which has a heavier emphasis on fast chaotic drums and unhinged vocals. As a result, it's one of their most aggressive and violent sounding tracks, and somehow keeps the energy up for a half hour. All the same things I said about the other disc from this album apply here as well. Very good stuff. 8 out of 10. Disc 19. The first track here adds an additional instrument to their arsenal, a theremin, or some other kind of sine wave generator. This adds some very welcome electronic sounds into the mix, aside the guitar abuse, feedback, and manic vocals that have been the core of their sound throughout the years. This track is satisfyingly harsh and dense, while having some sense of progression and variation as well. The other track replaces the theremin of drums, to its detriment in my opinion, though it's still a very solid piece of harsh noise. 8 out of 10. Disc 20. The opening track here is just a solid piece of dense noise that showcases just about every variety of sound they've used up to this point. The second track has some prominent male vocals for a change that sounds somewhat inspired by power electronics. Finally, the disc closes with yet another thinly recorded track that is decent but nothing particularly noteworthy. 7 out of 10. Disc 21. This disc begins with a primarily vocal-led track, which is often rather bland but has its moments, like when Junko and one of the guys in the band are alternating tortured screams back and forth. This is another track that I would say is a clear power electronics influence. The second track features some very violent drumming alongside Junko's shrieks and a plethora of other simultaneous noises. Very chaotic, infernal experience. I enjoyed this one. 7 out of 10. Disc 22. The first track on this one features near constant Junko vocals with the delay effect on them. The recording is a bit washed out sonically and lacks practically any bass frequencies, so it loses points with me there. But there are definitely some cool moments on it, like when one of the guitarists starts playing these absolutely dissonant, freakish sounds, and both guitars kind of alternate doing that back and forth. The second track has some fun sounds on it, but isn't particularly thrilling. The last track has a funny late-night TV show style introduction with someone saying something in Japanese, followed by King of Noise, Hijokaidan! This track is very solid and enjoyable, with lots of tasty noises throughout. 7 out of 10. Disc 23. This disc marks the beginning of a new millennium, and along with it, a very surprising development in Hijokaidan's sound. Actual music! By this I mean it opens with a vocalist actually singing real melodies, a guitar playing lovely arpeggios, and drums playing rhythms in consistent 4/4 time. I admittedly don't exactly know who's doing what here, and I realized the vocalist wasn't Junko when a bit later in the track, Junko's trademarked unhinged shrieks blast in over top the other vocalist's spoken word delivery. But anyhow, the track of course begins to incorporate more and more noise elements as it goes on, but the drumming actually stays on this consistent beat that sometimes becomes almost metronomic, leaving the noisier parts feeling surprisingly structured and thoughtful. The other vocalist then begins to do her own Junko-style screaming, and the two have a lovely duet throughout the rest of the performance. This should be considered an essential Hijokaidan track, as it's the only one I've heard that incorporates a borderline pop song that's surprisingly atmospheric and beautiful into their usual noise chaos. The other track here is mostly pure noise, but it does feature occasionally consistent drum rhythms and a melodic synth, or maybe an acoustic instrument of some kind, I'm not sure, that comes in and out playing oddly relaxing and almost lullaby-esque chord progressions alongside lengthy minimalistic repetitions of notes. The combination of intense chaotic noise with this soft and peaceful melodic sound is really interesting and makes this track another standout. Probably my favorite disc so far, 8 out of 10. Disc 24. This disc goes back to the basics, just their usual noise style. There's a bit more of a variety of electronic noises in the second track than on a lot of their previous material, so I guess that's a slight improvement, but overall I can't help but be disappointed that the experimentation with rhythm and melody from the last disc didn't carry on here. 7 out of 10. Disc 25. Yay, more noise! There really isn't much to say about these two tracks that I haven't said about the general Hijokaidan sound already, apart from them just being decent, solid performances, and very much what you'd expect at this point. 7 out of 10. Disc 26. It's just more noise, not much new to report here. Definitely some fun sounds here and there, but ultimately I'm left wishing for more sonic variety and for them to cover new ground somehow. For such an experimental band, they really don't seem to experiment much outside of their core sound. Perhaps that's because they were likely the first harsh noise band of all time, so their style at least used to be totally unique to them, and obviously at this point they're pretty damn good at it. Still, I can't help but be glad I'm almost through this box set, as I feel like I've heard the full spectrum of the Hijokaidan sound, and they don't have much to offer beyond that. I could be proven wrong on the final discs though. 7 out of 10. Disc 27. Apparently, this 73-minute disc is all taken from the same show, meaning they must have played a very long set. I suppose when you've been doing noise for 30 years and have the reputation Hijokaidan has, you're able to play as long as you want. There are 3 distinct tracks here, however, so either there are parts in between them edited out, or they just did 3 separate performances with breaks in between them on the same day. More importantly, the noise here is very good, and pretty much everything you'd want to hear out of pure noise Hijokaidan. The first track is more on the straight-ahead harsh noise style of things, while the second track is more atmospheric and trippy, though still very harsh. All of these tracks have a wide variety of easily distinguishable sounds bouncing around most of the time, despite their lo-fi room mic recording quality that has remained relatively consistent throughout this box set. 8 out of 10. Disc 28. Here's something a little different. This disc is a collection of solo works from several Hijokaidan members. It starts out with Mikawa's track We By N, which is just a straightforward, chaotic, harsh noise recording. It uses exclusively electronic sounds from what I can tell, which makes sense since Mikawa is the main electronics player in the band. And I honestly kind of prefer this style of harsh noise over the typical Hijokaidan sound, as there are a lot more interesting, varied, easily discernible sounds here. The next track is a short one by JoJo that's basically just some atmospheric guitar feedback drone coupled with sparse hand drumming. It's pretty good for what it is, and refreshing to hear something with a different vibe than the rest of the box set so far. The next 2 tracks are by Fumio Kosakai. The first one is an interesting combination of sung vocals and bowed orchestral instruments, basically a dark ambient track constructed from these sounds. The other one is a surprisingly accessible acoustic guitar and vocals song, albeit played in a very loose improvisational manner. I don't love it on its own, but it does provide a very pleasant break from the avant-garde hellscape that I've endured up to this point. Right after that break, though, we're back into the realm of utter inaccessibility with the final track on this disc, the A-side of the previously released Sleeping Beauty by Junko, which is effectively the entire album since the B-side is just the A-side reversed. This track features nothing but Junko's voice, doing what we'd expect Junko to do by now, but with zero instrumental accompaniment. It certainly is an impressive technical feat that she's able to crank out these maniacal screams and shrieks so consistently without getting any noticeable vocal fatigue, but I can't say her vocals work as well on their own as they do in the band. Interesting to hear if you admire Junko's unique vocal talents, but rather useless as a track by itself. Overall, while my enjoyment of this disc varied from track to track, I definitely appreciate this showcasing of the core members' individual skills, and the relative eclecticism of this disc compared to the rest of the box. Disc 29. This disc is a collection of tracks from various Hijokaidan collaborative projects and sister bands. The first track is by Hijokaidan, and pretty much sounds like a 70s punk rock song bathed in several layers of distortion. Next is a short one by SOB Kaiden, a collaboration between Hijokaidan and thrashcore legends SOB. It's similar to the first track, but faster and more hardcore. The recording is very bad, but that adds to it in a way. The next track is by Subvert Kaiden and sounds like Hijokaidan if they were a psych rock band. It consists of a repetitive, clean bass riff with drums, guitar noise, and singing, sort of moaning vocals getting added to it as it goes on. I really like the way this one gets louder, faster, and more intense over time. It has a real nice sense of progression to it. One of my favorite non-strictly noise tracks in this box. Next up is a track by Tomai Kaiden, which is a duo featuring JoJo and Kaizo Suhara. One of them delivers an impassioned speech while the other plays some absolutely epic, apocalyptic electric guitar chords, sounding almost like metal riffs. I wish the track progressed a bit more and added some more instruments at some point, and I also wish I could understand what this man is saying, but the atmosphere this track exudes is so spectacular that I still greatly enjoyed it. The next track is a longer one by Acid Mother's Kaiden, which is of course a collaboration between Hijokaidan and Acid Mother's Temple. Naturally, it's a fusion of psychedelic rock and noise like track 3, but a lot less effective than that one in my opinion. This is because while track 3 has a sense of progression and dynamics to it, this one takes the usual Hijokaidan approach, favoring consistent chaotic harshness and abstract improvisation, with the more musical psych rock elements simply becoming other sounds thrown into a blender. These sounds don't add much to the overall noise and just become kind of tedious and boring. The final track here is under the name Nisei Hijokaidan, and is a collaboration between Hijokaidan and CCCC, another legendary Japanese noise group. It's similar to Hijokaidan's typical fare, but with a bit of a harsher edge and more electronic sounds, making for a very effective psychedelic noise experience. Overall, like the previous disc, this one is very eclectic and inconsistent, but some of the most noteworthy moments in the whole box set are on here for sure. 7 out of 10. Disc 30. Well, here we are. I've made it to the end of this behemoth box. This last disc is by Hijokaidan, a band featuring JoJo, Junko, and a couple non-Hijokaidan members. I'm pretty sure this disc is just a previously released live album from 1983. It's more on the experimental noise rock side of things, but still played with the spirit and attitude of Hijokaidan. Off-kilter, angular guitar chords mesh with minimalistic repetitive drumming and a wall of washed-out static noise. Some tracks are mostly instrumental, some feature prominent vocals, either screamed or sung. Since this is all live, sometimes you can hear people talking, and the person recording seemingly moving around the microphone at times, which is a weird effect. This is one of the best fusions of noise and rock that I've heard, of a few examples of it in this box, because the musical elements are simultaneously avant-garde, while being rather danceable and at times even catchy. They go through many nice progressions despite their generally repetitive nature, and make many of these tracks really stand out as some of the best content in the whole box. I would have liked to hear this band do some studio recordings. They have great energy and very creative ideas on here. A great and relatively more accessible way to end this absolutely epic box set compilation. 8 out of 10. Conclusions. I feel somewhat relieved, but also very satisfied and proud of myself for stepping up to the challenge and getting through this release, writing down all my thoughts along the way. I think it was a very valuable experience for me, and I'd say that pretty much any fan of noise music should listen to this at least once. The sheer monolithic length, combined with the terrifyingly oppressive and uncompromising nature of the material within, makes this box not something just to casually listen to. You really have to do what I did and commit to listening to it on a regular basis over a long period of time to fully experience and appreciate this compilation. While Hijokaidan's signature sound isn't my personal favorite style of noise, I generally prefer the more heavy electronics-based approach to harsh noise, I definitely gained a greater appreciation for it by listening to this with an open mind. And aside from the sonic elements here, I just have so much respect and admiration for Hijokaidan and everything they've done for this art form I'm so passionate about. Their intense, shocking, and incredibly entertaining live performances continue to inspire countless noise artists, including me. They've poured buckets of paint over themselves, played with dead fish, gotten naked and pissed on stage. Classic transgressive performance art. The fact that they were pretty much the first harsh noise band ever should rocket them to legendary status on its own, and their extreme performances and lengthy dedication to noise making only serve to cement that position. Of course, this box set is a bit of a challenge to get through and can be very tedious and patience testing at times, but in a way, that's what makes it all the more impressive as a grand artistic statement, a condensing of 30 years of noise into 30 CDs. On a pure enjoyability scale, I'd have to rate this box set an average 7 out of 10, but as a comprehensive retrospective of a remarkable band's history, it accomplished its goals perfectly. That's all I have to say about Hijokaidan and the Noise compilation box set. Thank you for watching, and yeah, subscribe for more videos like this occasionally every once in a while when I feel like making them, which is not too often, but that's fine. Thanks for watching again. See ya.